Here now, the man I consider one of this nation's greatest public servants, whether you agree or disagree with his methods or his style or his blunt communications, David Stockman, the former budget director. David, very good to have you.
Glad to be here.
You know, as we were putting that together, David, I thought, man, oh man, we're going through a rewrite here. History again.
Well, I think we are, although there's a huge difference. In 1980, we had a clean national balance sheet. Our economy was growing. We had a relatively young population. We were still competitive in the world.
Well, we were in a recession, but you're talking about in the aggregate.
Right, but we also had a trade balance, slight trade balance with the rest of the world. Today, we are massively different. After 3 decades of huge debt increases, both in households, businesses, and government, we have $14 trillion of debt in the U.S. Government and $50 trillion in our total economy.
What did we have then when Reagan assumed office?
We had $5 trillion of total debt, public and private. It was about 1.6 times GDP. That was the historic average. We had shown over boom and bust and war and peace that we could live with public and private debt at about 1.5, 1.6 times GDP. Today, it's 3.6 times. Now, that may sound like, you know, a statistic that isn't that obvious, but had we stayed at the 1980 debt level ratio, call it our leverage ratio on the national economy, that had worked for decades, we would have today 22 trillion of debt on the national economy, not 52. So we are carrying around the households, the businesses of America, the taxpayers of America, the financial markets, 30 trillion more in debt than had we stayed on the historic path. So
right.
that's
well,
what's
we
happening.
Can't, you know, I'm not going to do the blame game at either Republicans or Democrats.
No,
I think, as you said, this is a bipartisan criticism, as you've been critical of Republicans and Democrats. But here's the one thing that I find amazing, that even Ronald Reagan, who was a champion of smaller government, had larger government when he was done. Now, he cut, as you said, just the growth of that, but he couldn't break its back. And if he couldn't do it, I'm thinking, man, oh man, who will?
It was tough and it was disappointing because we went in with a bit of a mandate from 1980 after 30, 40 years of relentless growth in government, the New Deal, the Great Society, the welfare state had begun to really balloon, to try to do something about it. And we blunted the growth, but we did not roll it back, we did not shrink it, and we made very little progress on the big entitlements. You know, at the...
They tried, I remember with the Grace Commission, but that extended its lease on life, I guess. But.
Well, maybe it did, but I think the numbers speak for themselves. During the 4 Carter years that we considered the big spending Carter years, domestic spending, that is less defense and security assistance, was about 16% of GDP. During the second Reagan term, after we got out of the recession and the temporary spending for that, it averaged 15.5% of GDP. So there was a small change, 0.5% of GDP. But that wasn't very much given where we started.
But the difference was we had a boom.
We had a boom because the huge inflation buildup of the 1970s was bluntly stopped and liquidated by a tough policy on the part of
Paul Volcker, right?
And when inflation came down from 9% when we came into office, it was actually been even higher than that, to less than 4% in a year and a half, it began to pave the way for the economy to recover and heal itself.
So you credit more what the Fed was doing to crack inflation than what Ronald Reagan was doing to cut taxes and all of that?
I think it was a combination of both. I think the tax cuts did stimulate the economy.
But you warned the president that, look, we've overdone it, right? You said essentially we've overdone it.
That's exactly right.
What did he tell you?
He basically didn't want to believe that, wanted to give some time to see whether the economy would grow strong enough so that we could grow our way out of it.
But the economy did grow enough to justify his vision for lower taxes, right? I mean, whether it addressed it, you're right, that's a mug's game. But he was in a pickle in '82 in the polls because people were waiting and saying, we don't see it. by 84, the boom was on, and he was saying, told you so.
Well, but I think that ignores some very important history, and that is that the 1981 tax cut was way too big. We got into a bidding war. There were all kinds of
and he scaled it back. He addressed it.
So in 1982, when the deficit was ballooning to 5 or 6% of GDP, and the economy was not recovering, and there wasn't very much light at the end of the tunnel, he signed a tax increase bill at the bottom of a recession when unemployment was still 10%.
His people regretted that at the time, that they blinked in the face of a boom that was just prepared to be unleashed, and they regretted that move.
Well, that's revisionist history. I think it is wrong. The facts wouldn't warrant it.
You said at the time Reagan was worried.
He was worried, and that's why he did sign not one tax bill in August of 1982, but another one in 83. By that I mean tax increase. Right. One in 84, the Social Security bailout plan, which was essentially a payroll tax increase.
But the end result in all of those, notwithstanding, rates were still lower when he left office than when he came in, dramatically so.
Yes, the marginal rates were lower. And the revenue level in the economy was about 18% of GDP. The inherited level was about 19%. That was the average under Carter. So there was this reduction in the aggregate as well as in individual rates.
But you argue it was short-lived, right?
Yeah, the problem was that we didn't cut spending enough. We had this huge defense increase, way too much in my judgment. So we ended up with a higher spending level than under Carter, okay? Even though we did slow down domestic, there was so much domestic increase that the average spending level under Reagan in the second term was about 22%.
But the bottom line, then, the warring parties, the Tip O'Neills and the Brown, they actually liked each other. They could work with each other. There's a doubt now as to whether that persists today. David Stockman, we're going to pursue that again, move from then to now. And some of the big differences, Mr. Stockman says, are preventing any sort of immediate change right now.